Hello and welcome. His shows sell out quickly all over the world as he incorporates his brilliantly comic and usually irreverent observations about people and cultures into his act. This week on One-on-One, meet the remarkably talented stand-up comedian Russell Peters.
Somebody gonna get hurt real bad. That was my dad's threat right before he beat me every single time. Oi, Russell. Somebody gonna get hurt real bad. I hated that threat. You know why? Because he'd always say somebody. He'd never tell you it was you. I mean, you knew it was you. But he'd give you this hope.
Born in Toronto to a Catholic family, this Canadian Indian discovered his talent for making people laugh at an early age. He jokes about his parents making him perform for dinner guests when he was still a young boy. Peters credits his ability to dissect cultural traits and eccentricities to growing up in an area with many cultures and religions, and uses blatant stereotypes in his act, not to offend, he says, but to highlight just how silly the stereotypes are. He also points out the amount of hard work it's taken to get where he is, having started out in comedy clubs in 1989. Russell Peters' popularity is evident by the packed houses that greet him the world over as he engages regularly in grueling international tours. And he's still considered, even by his peers, as one of the best comedians around.
Oi, Russell! Somebody gonna get hurt real bad. Somebody. I'm not going to say who. Oh, I think you might know him very well.
Russell, it's actually a delight to meet you in person, having followed your work.
You too, finally, Riz. I've done your show without you.
That's true, yeah, and I apologize for that. But, you know, you're pretty much a big sellout on just about every continent.
Wait a minute.
You know? No,
what
it's
do you
true.
mean I'm a big sellout?
A big sellout. Sorry,
All
your
right,
show
sorry.
sellout. I guess even the Penguins would line up if you went down there. But basically, what is it about your humor that really appeals to people, you think?
You know, if I knew, I would tell people how to do it. I think it's a question of, appealing to, speaking to people that aren't being spoken to, people that are visible yet invisible by the media's standards. So I'm the guy speaking to them on their level, and then I genuinely know things about them. So I think that makes people more comfortable with laughing at the things I say.
You've been a performer for almost 2 decades. You don't look old enough, I should say. But,
thank you.
Is it hard to keep it fresh?
I was on stage last night. Funny you should ask. I was on stage last night, and I was doing my act, and I started thinking, this is really, I don't know if it's egotistical or if it's a scary thought, but I started thinking, wow, this is a really good joke. I don't know that I'm going to be able to write jokes like this any longer. It really was on my mind as the joke was coming out of my mouth, and I went, have I reached the bottom of this barrel yet?
But you do, I mean, you push the boundaries. You're willing to push the boundaries of political correctness, but you still seem to keep reasonably respectful. Are there limits on the boundaries you would cross?
Well, I don't really, I don't talk about religion. I just refuse to, just because it's too much of a volatile situation for everybody. Everybody in every religious denomination is real touchy about that subject. And you know what? I'm not a religious person myself, so who am I to say who's right or wrong or make my opinions be known about anything? So I just stick to culture and race and the way it affects us in today's society.
Is everything else fair game otherwise?
Otherwise, everything else is fair.
Kids now are growing up in a multicultural society. You know, you're going to have white kids growing up with black kids and brown kids and Asian kids, and they're all going to be hanging out in the playground. You know what I mean? And they're going to be talking about the ass whooping they got last night. Do you want that little white kid to feel left out? Beat that child so he's not a social outcast.
You know, as an Indian entertainer, it's still a fairly new area because it's not on the typical sort of Indian career list, you know, doctor, lawyer, comedian.
That's right.
So what sort of obstacles have you faced?
Well, I faced every obstacle that there was to face because I was the first guy. So, when you're the first guy facing everything, you don't know what an obstacle is or not. You just assume that that's just the way things go. So, I mean, the fact that it took me 20 years to get to where I'm at now may have taken somebody else 10 to 15, you know what I mean? So maybe the obstacles added time to my thing, but in comedy, the longer you wait, the better you get. So it didn't really hurt me.
Now, you play up on the Indian thing quite a bit. In fact, you got all my friends just calling me up randomly and saying, Bernd. Exactly. So,
Bernd.
so do you find that you're able to bridge some gaps, by being a little more self-effacing about the Indian culture? Or do you find that, people get a little touchy about the Indian thing coming into it?
Lately, I do this stuff about traveling back to India, and it's all true. It's all from my perspective. It's, nobody can say that I'm wrong because this is really what I saw and this is what I felt. But I was on stage one night in Houston and I was talking about and going to Bombay. And when I arrived in Bombay, your parents don't warn you about certain things when they tell you when you're going back to India. They don't. All they told my mom told me was, be respectful. Hello, auntie. No, uncle. Yes, please. Good morning. Good afternoon. But she didn't tell me when you get off the plane, you're going to smell really bad smell when you get off that plane. That you're going to smell poo the minute you step off the plane. And this woman in the audience got mad. Well, clearly you have a problem with India. If you don't like it, don't go back. I'm like, well, if you like it so much, why aren't you there right now? But I wasn't slamming Bombay for it. I was just saying, this is what I smelt when I got off the plane. Well, how can you get mad at me for smelling something?
How do you handle the criticism if it comes?
I'm a comic. I handle it like a comic. I don't get offended by it.
You were the first North American born and raised Indian comedian, to go across and perform in India. So, in general, how did you find how different was the Indian audience on the home turf, so to speak?
I'll tell you something about the Indian audience. They are way smarter than, I don't want to slam the Indians outside of India, but they are way sharper than the Indians who left. Because what happened was the Indians that left with their picture of India from when they left and didn't realize that India continued to move on without them. For some reason, our arrogance is really high, and we think that when we leave, that the whole country stops without us. And no, that's not the way it works. They kept moving, and in fact, they moved past us. And they were with it. Like every word I said, every suggestion I made, every inference I made, they were with it. They got it 150%. More so than the Indians here get it. Like when I make a joke that has something not to do with being Indian, they don't get it sometimes. And in India, I could make jokes about everything and anything, and they got it. And it wasn't like they were just laughing because I was there and they felt like that was the time to laugh. They were genuinely laughing.
No, it's very sophisticated, actually, when you get there. And
yeah, I was really blown away by it.
You were born in Toronto and lived in Brampton, I think it was, or raised in Brampton.
B-Town represent.
And what do you remember of those early years growing up in Canada?
Man, I remember everything. I have a really ridiculous memory. My earliest memories are at around 3 years old, so, and I can remember music from then, and then I can remember everything from then. So, you go ahead. I've got tons of memories.
Now, your parents, how did they influence you? What sort of upbringing was it?
Well, my dad was like an English major in India, so writing was his big thing, and proper grammar and proper English was always number one on the agenda for him. So, as far as communicating and stuff like that, my dad made sure that we were able to do so, and that our vernacular was much broader than most people's. Mine didn't expand as much as he would like to have. My brothers did, but mine didn't. I hung around a different crowd than my brother.
What characteristics did you get from him?
I think the sharp wit, if I can say I have it. My dad had a very sharp wit, and he was a very astute listener when people would talk, and he was a great storyteller as well.
What would he have made, or what did he make, I should say, of your career choice?
It was one of those things in my family. They didn't really. It's not like they were against it. Like people are like, "Oh, weren't your parents mad?" I'm like, no, because at that time nobody knew what stand-up comedy was. Especially in an Indian house, I was like, "Dad, I'm going to be a comedian." They were like, "That's nice." That's kind of like your child coming to you and saying, "Dad, I'm going to be a spaceman." And you're like, "That's nice, son. You'd be a spaceman." And it'll freak you out if your kid grows up and becomes a spaceman, So when I told my dad I wanted to be a comedian, he was like, "That's nice. Go ahead, whatever."
The first show
kind of dismissive.
Well, and then when it actually worked out?
Then they were quite happy. Then they could always say, we supported them from the beginning.
But they didn't come to your shows, was it? Because I gather the swearing and stuff, they offended.
Yeah, they didn't really come. My mom comes to my shows now, more often than not. My dad came to a couple, I think, before he passed away. Not that I can remember, but but yeah, my mom comes, and it's awkward now because sometimes the subject matter, goes down the road of sex, and that's not really what you want your mom to hear you talking about.
I wanted to ask the characteristics you got from your mother.
Well, my mom, I'm the perfect hybrid of both my parents. My dad was like the, he was really high intelligence and a great speaker and broad with the English language, and he was kind of serious, and my dad kind of told it like it was, and wasn't afraid if he hurt your feelings. Now my mom's the complete opposite. My mom doesn't want to hurt anybody's feelings, and everybody, no, don't say that. Come on. I remember my mom would be like, come on, Eric, no, what he meant was, my mom was like the cleanup crew.
So she in the audience going through, no, he's not really picking on you.
No, he's not really saying that. That's not what he's saying. My mom's that kind of person, and she's always wanted to please everybody else, and so I'm the hybrid of both of them. I'm not as harsh as my father was, and I'm only like that on stage. I'll only tell you to your face when I have a microphone in my hand. Off stage, I probably won't say anything to you. I'd probably just ignore you or whatever.
What did you think you would end up doing? I mean, before you started performing, because it was obviously when you were relatively young.
19.
What did you think you would end up doing before that?
At 18, 19 years old, you really don't think of the future. I was boxing at the time. I was DJing at the time. I used to break dance before that. I was always trying to do something. I didn't know which was going to come forward for me, and I just started doing stand-up because everybody kept telling me to do it.
I was going to say, at what point did you realize, or people say you were funny?
They always used to say I was funny, but I didn't think anything of it. I didn't. It's just, I guess for good-looking women, if somebody tells them they're good-looking their whole life, they don't, and until somebody says you should get into modeling, they don't really think of it. They're just happy being a good-looking person. So I was happy being a funny guy. I would have been happy being the funny guy working in the shoe store in the mall,
Now, a lot of people who actually are funny, on stage or funny on screen, they're often very reclusive, or their character in real life doesn't reflect their nature. You seem to have a sort of funny nature about you.
Yeah, I'm pretty much who I am. I don't, the Russell Peters and Russell are very, very similar people, Russell Peters is just a more amplified is a more amplified version of Russell. So,
but having to get up, of course, now in front of huge audiences is presumably it's a confidence-building thing as well.
Oh yeah, it's funny, because I could get up in front of 15,000 people and perform. I don't feel pressure of oh my God, are they going to like me? Well, clearly they're there, so they already like you. So that pressure's taken out of the equation, and now it's a question of I don't want to let them down. So get out there and really do your thing. But the other night I was in Toronto, and I went into the comedy club that I started at, Yuck Yucks, and it was like a Wednesday night, and I just felt like going on stage, and the club wasn't full, but it, and I got nervous before I went on stage that night, because I was like, oh man, they're gonna have such high expectations, and I don't know that I have the material to deliver right now. So it was fun for me to get nervous there and not, in other places.
Because you don't generally, nowadays, you can go out there and not feel it.
Yeah, it's not like a nervous thing. It's more of an anxiousness, I get anxious to get on.
Russell, don't go away. I'm going to ask you a few more questions. We're going to take a short break here. We're back with more one-on-one in just a moment.